Hello again, Madison tuning in to tell you about knitting as promised. So I actually got into knitting a few months ago, probably last fall, because I was on another one of my excursions to make some side money, like, oh gosh, knitting, look at this on Etsy, it can't be that hard, right? And let's do a hobby that's super cheap, gonna get a high profit margin, right? Well, yeah, that's not exactly how it turns out because you're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna knit a blanket from like one ball of yarn. It's gonna be amazing. And so you go out and you buy the books. You see, first you gotta have all these books. So let me tell you about that first. So you gotta have here this information here. Everything the internet did not teach you about knitting. Very important because the internet doesn't ever make any sense. Knitting made easy, learn how to knit. That's going to be super easy, right? 20 easily knitted blankets and throws. Blankets probably one of my favorite things in the whole world. Nothing better than a warm blanket. So you get these books and you're like, okay, so let's get started. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna get a couple of needles. So you go out and you're like, well, do I get these like really fat ones like this? These are called circular knitting needles, okay? Or do I get really skinny ones like this? I don't know. I mean, what is that? What does that mean? And you're like, okay, well maybe I don't need that. Maybe what I really need is some really long needles, okay? So like this, like my grandmother does. She's been knitting dishcloths forever, right? And maybe that's what I need because my project's always getting all stuck up in this stupid circular knitting needles. And you're like, okay, well, what size do I get? Well, I guess you just buy a whole package of them because who knows what you need. Probably never the same one, but then you're like, okay, but what if I really need to commit to the circular knitting needle thing? So then you're going to get this circular knitting needle kit with every size that you could possibly need except for maybe the one that you actually need. And then you're like, okay, so let me get to knitting. You're like, okay, what kind of yarn do I want? I don't know. So you're like out and you're like getting on Amazon and Joann's and you're like, okay, let me check out these coupons at Joann's and Michael's. And you're like, I don't know. If there's a coupon, maybe I should just buy every kind of yarn they have. So then you're like, okay, I'm going to sort this yarn in this giant container thing that I bought on Amazon. It's going to be so nice. But you're like, oh, knitting is actually kind of hard. Okay, that's taking a really long time, and I think that my fingers might fall off from poking the tops of the needles every time I have to pop the thread over, right? So you're like, okay, I'm going to get smart. Work smarter, not harder, right? So now you're going to get this thing called the Addi Express Professional. So let me show you what that looks like. That, my friends, is this machine here. So it has a counter on it, and you basically just go around in a circle and make only circular things because the paneling option is no good. Hate to say it. Paneling option, no good. It's all turned over, and then you have to like get involved in ironing or something, and like, who wants to do any kind of ironing? Not me. So then you're like, okay, well, that's really small, and I guess all I can make are like baby hats and like mittens, but your mittens, like they never turn out right. Like you end up like this. This is what I got for mittens, okay? Like I haven't even finished sewing this side right here. No good. Like every time it happens with the thumb, it doesn't look right, right? Like that doesn't look right. If I put that on, what's going on there? Why doesn't it look like, that's not the way it looks in the photo? What went wrong? So you're like, I'm not doing that anymore. So then you go out and you're like, I'm going to get the Addi Express king size. Okay? Much bigger. You can make hats for real humans. on these. That actually went much better for me. So I made these hats here, right? Okay, awesome. One for me, one for my husband. Except very frustrating to knit with that heavyweight yarn on the Addi machine. But, you know, at least you can make hats. But then you're like, okay, kind of done with the hat making thing. Don't want to make hats for the rest of my life. So you're like, you know what? Let me get into this loom knitting thing. So loom knitting, for those who don't know, this is an Afghan knitting loom. Haven't used it yet, mostly because the only kind of loom knitting I know so far is the kind that goes across these pegs, and it's kind of hard for me to tell which one is directly across. You can also use these round looms. Haven't used these yet either, but they look pretty promising. Again, though, with the hats, you know, hats and socks and round things. And, you know, you gotta have, of course, you gotta have the pom-pom maker. You know, haven't even gotten these out of the box yet. Don't know how to make a pom. And then, let's see, my other loom where I actually make projects is here. So that's this one. Isn't that cool? Doesn't that look nice with this blanket yarn, Bernat blanket yarn? Always super soft at Joann's. It's one of the first things I always go for, even though I have no idea what I'm going to do with it. Probably won't ever actually finish making a blanket because that would take a lot of patience, which I don't have. So sometimes that makes me wonder why I'm pursuing knitting. But you know, it's slow in the game, and it's not like the yarn's gonna rot. So even if 5 years from now I decide to pick it up again, you know, it'll be there. So then, you know, you're gonna loom knit. So now you gotta have some more books, right? Like, I can't believe I'm loom knitting. Okay? And Loom Knitting Primer. Very good book for figuring out what in the world you're doing. Then you're gonna need, of course, this Loom Knit Stitch Dictionary, because you don't want to keep knitting the same stitch over and over again like you did on your Addi machine for your hats. You're like, let's change this up. Let's get something else going here. So you're like, okay, that's going to be awesome, but what about changing colors in my knitting project? I want to do this awesome stuff, you know, like the hats they sell at those ski shops that everybody loves. And then you're like, oh, but I actually don't really know what I'm doing. So maybe I should just start with the building blocks back on the needles. You know, should I start there? Because then I actually know what these stitches mean. You know, to date, I really only know the knit and the purl stitch. And then I recently learned the ribbed stitch. Only on my loom, though. Couldn't actually do that on needles, of course. Then there's this book that everyone on Amazon loves, A to Z Knitting. Apparently, it's a really fantastic book, and it answers all of your questions, even intermediate knitters, long-time knitters. Best thing about this book, do you see those real hands with real needles, real yarn? Yes, no more of that cartoon garbage that they always put in the books, and you're like, okay, step 1 is like tie a knot. Step 2 is like do this crazy maneuver with your hands that we didn't actually bother to draw out. Step 3 is boom, done, complete. So exciting. And you're like, what happened between steps 2 and steps 3? I don't know. You know, so then you're going on YouTube. You're like, I gotta find a video. I don't know what's going on, you know. And I gotta watch this 12-second ad before I can see this lady show me how to do this knitting, because I don't know what's going on, right? YouTube, very helpful. Then, of course, now that I've determined that knitting is super slow, I want these Cozy Knit 50 fast and easy projects, right? Fast and easy. That is me. That's your girl, right? So those are all my books and my needles and things and my million piles of yarn and my machines. So all of that together collectively, I have made some panels that are messed up looking and don't make any sense. Then I've made a bunch of hats. I have made those messed up mittens that I showed you. But my project that I hold closest to my heart is this project, a scarf, as you can see. Started out making this scarf a couple of weeks ago, and I was actually going to have 24 rows of stitches across. Well, that was a mistake because it was taking forever to finish this project. And I still felt committed to it though, because I was like, I think I was like 40-something rows in, and let me tell you, on loom knitting, 40-something rows in, that's counting both sides as one row, which I don't even know if you're supposed to do that. That takes a long time. Well, then I had done that in one day, and I went back and I was going to do it the next day, and I guess I wasn't doing it the same way anymore because suddenly all my stitches were moved over one and they were all messed up, and I'm like, okay, I have to look online for a video for how to recover. How do I recover from this mistake? I don't know. They don't know. I don't know how many rows I'm doing because I don't know what counts as a row. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to unravel my whole project. Should have done 12 rows like the book said from the beginning. So then I undo the whole thing. Everything is tangled. I have to wrap the ball of yarn up because, you know, of course, the ball of yarn was like $5.50. So I don't want to waste that. No. Got to wrap it back up. And then I start 12 rows. So I ended up doing 12 stitches across, and I ended up doing 200 rows, I think, in total for this project. And as you can see, very nice ribbed stitching, right? So then I get to the end of my project, and here at the beginning, I had this very nice braided line in here, right? Very nice. But at the end, when I watched the YouTube video on how to take the stitches off, should have watched the whole thing before I started doing it because it turned out like this, all messed up, right? No more nice in line. So I'm like, okay, well that sucks, you know? And I'm like, I guess I'm going to have to add these little fringes on the end to take away from the fact that I spent all this time on this project and then it doesn't even look right on one end, you know? There's no recovering from that. Again, with the recovery videos, not one out there, but I'm not wasting this project that I spent a million hours on. 200 rows of 12 stitches on my loom? Absolutely not. Anyways, so that's my only like legitimately completed project, if you can even count that as a legitimately completed project. Yeah, so knitting is pretty crazy if you get into it. If anyone has any cool project ideas that I can use on my super fancy equipment that I've spent like $1 million on Amazon and at Joann's, God bless both of those things, get at me, you know. And in the meantime, just remember, knit happens, folks. Isn't that funny? Yeah.